Hello, restless soul. Tonight, picture the soft shimmer of firelight stretching across stone walls, their surfaces etched with intricate carvings. The air is thick, laced with incense, and carrying the sharp tang of wines slowly fermenting in clay vessels. Silk curtains drift with the evening breeze, brushing lightly against brass lamps where small flames flicker and sputter. You sit cross-legged upon cool mosaic tiles, surrounded by traders speaking in hushed tones, their words foreign and strange to your ears. Greek envoys wave delicate fans of peacock feathers, while nearby priests chant in low voices, their rumble like thunder caged inside human throats. Outside the palace walls, torches line the garden paths, marking where nightingales weave their songs among blooming pomegranates. But here, within these chambers, you are more than a visitor, you have become a witness. A witness to a world that once stunned with its riches, ruled with iron laws, and lived by customs that felt sacred to them, but now, to us centuries later, seem completely foreign, almost impossible to grasp. Truth be told, you probably wouldn't last a single night in ancient Persia. But don't worry, I'll be your guide through every step. And before we move deeper into this story, if this calm company eases your mind, feel free to tap like and subscribe, but only if your heart tells you to. And while you're here, share where you're listening from. Perhaps you're wide awake in New York, or maybe you're nestled in a quiet corner of London. Leave your time and place below so we can remind each other that none of us drift alone tonight. Now, dim the lights, loosen your shoulders, and let's set out on this slow and wondrous journey together here on Timeless Sleep. Slowly, your vision clears, and the king's grand court rises before your eyes. Before you, seated upon a throne of gold, is Darius, or perhaps Xerxes, depending on which century you've stepped into. His seat is raised so high that even the tallest noble appears like a nervous child waiting for permission to speak. His robe glimmers like fire woven into fabric, embroidered with griffins frozen in the moment of attack. Around him, servants move quickly yet silently, as if they were shadows come to life. You remind yourself this isn't a fairy tale, it was real. This was the empire of endless roads, longer than any Netflix binge you've ever powered through. The land where couriers delivered messages faster than your Amazon packages ever could. And here, kings weren't simply rulers, they were chosen by the cosmos itself, as if the universe had slipped a divine job offer into their inbox. What surprises you most is how ordinary all of this felt to them. Guided by a strict Zoroastrian vision of the world, everything was sorted into precise categories: pure and impure, order and chaos. Fire? Sacred. Corpses? Defiled. Even something as small as hair clippings carried a mark of impurity. By their standards, your modern bathroom sink would be treated like a crime scene. But these weren't just quirky rules, they were the framework of existence itself. They dictated whether you could draw water, eat your bread, or lie down to sleep without the gnawing guilt of offending the divine. Purity to the Persians wasn't about washing your hands before dinner. It was a cosmic battle, waged with every sip of water, each breath you took, even every sneeze carefully stifled behind your sleeve. You glance down at the floor, suddenly aware of the discipline surrounding you. Even the tiles beneath your body are part of this order. No one dares spit, no one dares scatter crumbs. To do so might invite punishment not just from the king, but from the heavens themselves. Imagine living like that. In a world without mop buckets or lemon-scented disinfectant wipes, keeping the sacred fire pure wasn't a matter of simple housekeeping. It was a full-blown spiritual emergency. Priests defended the flames with the same zeal modern fans used to protect their favorite TV show from spoilers. Picture the tension. Sneeze too close to the holy fire, and instantly you've become the villain of the story. And those priests, they were a sight to behold. Armed with bundles of twigs, chanting endless prayers, and never far from their jars of bull's urine. Yes, actual jars stored in temple corners like suspicious bottles of homemade kombucha. If you brushed against a corpse, walked through the wrong kind of shadow, Or maybe just had an unlucky Tuesday, they would douse you with that sharp-smelling liquid, believing it was heaven's own version of bleach. To your nose, it would reek like a prank gone horribly wrong. To them, it was nothing less than a divine reset button. Somewhere, you can almost hear a Persian teenager grumbling, "Great, Dad! Now I smell like the sacred cow again," before stomping off in protest. But religion wasn't the only thing that would leave you reeling. Social customs carried their own surprises. Marriage, for example, could mean arrangements your dating app profile never prepared you for. Unions between close relatives weren't whispered scandals. They were proudly upheld as holy acts, viewed as a way to recycle the family tree in service of cosmic balance. The Greeks, of course, were appalled. Yet Persians saw it as a reinforcement of divine order, a way to keep bloodlines strong and sacred law intact. So if you're shifting uneasily right now, just imagine the poor Greek ambassador tasked with explaining all of this in letters home. "Dear Athens, you wouldn't believe what passes as ordinary here. Take another look at the banquet stretched before you. Golden platters overflow with saffron roasted lamb, mountains of rice sparkling with ruby pomegranate seeds, sticky sweet dates that cling to your fingers, and wine poured into cups so polished they glow like captured suns." The Persians adored their wine, but erase any picture of drunken brawls. Every cup was carefully mixed with water, diluted so the celebrations could last for days on end. And last they did, feasts stretched on with endless toasts, the kind that make you wish someone had already invented coffee. Guests were expected to keep pace, which turned drinking into the empire's most dangerous game. The unspoken rule? Don't collapse before the king notices. If you think your office happy hour feels stressful, imagine one where refusing a refill could cost you your reputation in front of an empire. While you sip, the air fills with music. Flutes sing in quick trills, lutes murmur low and sweet, and drums pulse like an extra heartbeat beneath your ribs. Dancers glide across the floor, veils shimmering in lamplight as though woven from fire. Yet the true stage is not the performance before your eyes, it lies hidden in the whispers of the harem. The royal women, veiled and unseen, shaped politics from behind closed doors. With gifts, secrets, and careful words, they sent ripples of influence outward, ripples that could change the fate of nations like stones cast into a still pond. Imagine a world where gossip carried more weight than battalions of soldiers. One slip of the tongue might shatter an alliance. Think Mean Girls, only with more gold, higher stakes, and far fewer cafeteria trays. Even punishment in Persia had the feel of bizarre theater. A thief might walk away missing his ears. A traitor could find himself sealed alive between brick walls. A liar might be forced to prove his honesty by surviving molten metal. If his tongue blistered, that was taken as guilt confirmed. Strange reasoning to us, no doubt. But for Persians, justice wasn't about the kind of fairness you and I imagine. It was about scrubbing chaos from the world, about showing that demons hadn't hitched a ride on your words. Think of it as Judge Judy, only swap the scolding for fire, and cut out the commercial breaks. Step outside the palace walls and you find yourself in the markets, where wonder and unease collide. Stalls overflow with perfumed oils, ivory chess pieces, cinnamon, and bolts of turquoise-dyed silk that catch the sun like gemstones. Babylonian merchants haggle with Egyptian camel drivers, their voices clashing as strongly as their cultures. Spices thicken the air until your nose feels like it's running an obstacle course. But alongside the luxuries, superstition thrives. Snake charms dangle on cords, turquoise amulets promise to ward off death, and magi mutter cures, tying knots in wool to chase away a fever. You half expect someone to hand you a sample jar of crocodile dung sunscreen, though that was more of an Egyptian quirk. The Persians had their own curiosities, like powdered helmer plants used to trigger visions that sound suspiciously psychedelic. And then the garden, the paradisa, a word that would one day evolve into our paradise. Enclosed by high walls to keep out desert winds, it becomes a hidden oasis. Underground canals, engineered with astonishing precision, guide water into trickling streams, rivaling the work of modern plumbing. Roses bloom in neat, symmetrical rows, their fragrance drifting through the air like a promise that order and beauty can survive even in a harsh land. Cypress trees rise along the pathways, straight and solemn, like soldiers frozen on guard. Birds flit between fountains where lions snarl in carved stone, their beaks dipping into the rippling water. For the Persians, this was never mere decoration. A garden wasn't just flowers and shade, it was theology written in soil. Here, order conquered chaos, and heaven itself was captured in miniature, made for human delight. As you wander through, it dawns on you, you are literally walking inside the prototype of paradise. Though, even in this sacred space, you can still spot a weary gardener scolding children for trying to scramble up the fig trees. What astonishes you most isn't one custom in particular, but the seamless normality of them all. Towers of silence for the dead? Of course. Wine diluted with water, toasting until sunrise? Why not? Ear mutilations as punishments, signed and sealed like official paperwork? Standard procedure. Sacred bull's urine splashed in the name of purification? Perfectly reasonable. If you lifted a skeptical eyebrow at any of this, they would only arch theirs higher, baffled by your confusion. This was the rhythm of Persia, a civilization convinced it safeguarded cosmic order, while outsiders scribbled scandalized reports in the margins. And so, here you remain in the palace. A servant tops off your cup. Music swells. Torchlight leaps higher for a moment before the desert wind rattles at the garden walls. You shift uncomfortably in your seat, realizing that what made the Greek ambassador pale, what makes you smirk nervously now, was nothing more than an ordinary Tuesday night in ancient Persia. Gradually, the torches gutter low. The court hushes, wrapped in a velvet blanket of silence. You join a solemn procession of priests winding out through narrow alleys. The sweet haze of spice and wine fades, replaced by dry air laced with dust, and somewhere ahead, the faint, uneasy rustle of wings. Up ahead, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, a strange structure rises. A circular tower, massive and bare, shaped like a giant stone drum. It has no decoration, no music, no welcome, only silence, broken now and then by the faint creak of its wooden gates. This is no palace, no temple, no amphitheater. This is a dakma, a tower of silence. Here, the Persians brought their dead. Not to bury them, not to burn them, but to surrender them to the waiting vultures. You pause, uneasy. Every part of you resists. You're used to graves marked with flowers, tombstones carved with names, urns set carefully on mantels. Here, there is none of that. To the Zoroastrian priest, earth and fire were too sacred to be polluted by death. A corpse wasn't simply a body, it was a contaminant, a dangerous vessel for Nasu, the demon of decay. To bury it would poison the soil forever. To cremate it would desecrate fire itself, the purest of elements. So what was the answer? A tower. A high, circular platform where the dead could be lifted into the sky and offered to the birds. You climb the narrow stone steps, each one heavier than the last. At the top, the moonlight spills across a flat platform, encircled by low stone walls. The ground is arranged in rings, like grotesque flower petals. On them lie bodies. Some still wrapped loosely in cloth, recent and raw. Others reduced to nothing but pale bones, polished by months beneath the desert sun. At the very center yawns a deep stone pit, the ossuary. When the vultures had finished their work, priests swept the stripped bones inward with long iron rakes, custodians of mortality tidying what remained. No names. No markers. Only bones mingling together in anonymity. Here, rest in peace was not the promise. Rest efficiently, with avian assistance, was closer to the truth. Above you, the sky churns with wings. Dark silhouettes of birds wheel against the stars until one suddenly dives, landing with a heavy thud upon a lifeless chest. Its beak tears into flesh with the casual ease of someone ripping open a snack bag. Then another swoops down, and another. Soon the platform quivers with movement, wings beating, feathers thrashing, beaks snapping. The air fills with sound, bones splintering like drums, feathers hissing like cymbals. A grim orchestra, playing only for the dead. You instinctively shrink back. But to the priests in white robes, this is sacred work. The vultures aren't monsters, they're servants of order, purifiers who strip away corruption and carry it far from the living. Think of it as an ancient recycling program, except the bins are feathered and the material being processed is human bone. To the Persians, this was orderly, even beautiful, a ritual that spared both earth and fire from pollution. Outsiders, though, recoiled. Greek travelers shuddered as they wrote about corpses laid bare to dogs and birds. Later invaders, blind to the theology behind it, dismissed the practice as cruel barbarity. But standing here, among the priests murmuring their chants, you begin to see it differently. It is no chaos. It is choreography. A ritual of precision, as strange as it is deliberate. And it didn't begin at the tower. The moment a death occurred, the family was forbidden from touching the body. To do so would spread Nasu, the demon of decay. Instead, special corpse bearers arrived, professionals of mortality, almost like movers, but with more chanting and solemnity. They carried the dead upon iron stretchers, for iron was the one metal demons feared. The grieving family followed behind at a distance, crying but careful not to brush against the body. Even their home was considered polluted, ritually cleansed with ash, swept with sacred tools, sometimes abandoned altogether. Sorry, children, we'll need a new apartment. The old one is demon-occupied now. At the tower's summit, the priests intoned prayers as the body was laid upon the stone, the first act in a ritual already centuries old. The priests began by dusting the body with powdered lime, a kind of spiritual disinfectant meant to guard against corruption. Then they stepped back, leaving the rest of the work to the circling birds. Days later, when only the skeleton remained, the bones were swept into the central pit. There, rainwater would slowly wash them down, dissolving them into the soil below. To you, the process feels unnerving, maybe even harsh. But to the Persians, it was the most honorable way to keep purity intact. Ashes did not defile fire. Bones resting in the ossuary did not contaminate the ground. In their eyes, order was restored, demons held at bay. Try explaining that to your modern neighbor. We don't bury our dead. We outsource them to vultures. Cue the horrified silence, followed by the frantic sound of someone Googling property values in another neighborhood. Yet this was no passing custom. The practice endured for centuries, even millennia. Towers of silence rose on hilltops near the great cities, stark and immovable against the horizon. For families, they became familiar landmarks. Children grew up tracing their silhouettes against the evening sky, no more unsettling than a church steeple or a city clock tower today. And here lies the real surprise. To Persians, the tower was not a place of terror. It wasn't haunted, cursed, or whispered about in fear. It was practical. Functional. As ordinary to them as a recycling bin is to us. You can almost imagine two friends strolling past one on their way to market. One glances up and shrugs. Looks like they've had a busy week up there. Morbid? Yes. But utterly normal. Back on the platform, you stand still as a priest raises his voice in chant. The sound pours out low and steady, reverberating against the stones, blending with the heavy beat of wings circling overhead. The vultures never hesitate. They are part of the ritual, as essential as the prayers themselves. One, heavy with its meal, hops lazily to the edge and lifts into the night sky. Almost instantly, another swoops down to take its place, beak already tearing. The cycle doesn't pause, not for one body, not for 10. It is continuity. It is order. The eternal struggle against impurity, carried out wing by wing. And within that rhythm, the Persians found something like peace. Of course, peace is a matter of perspective. Picture being the apprentice chosen for corpse-bearer duty. Congratulations, son. Welcome to the sacred guild. Here's your iron stretcher, your bucket of lime, and a reminder to watch out for the beaks. You can imagine there wasn't exactly a waiting list for that position. Yet for those who served, it carried real honor. Someone had to stand guard against Nasu. Someone had to make sure the stain of death didn't seep into soil or flame. The Greeks, naturally, had their own opinions. Herodotus, with his sharp tongue and air of superiority, described Persians as abandoning their dead to dogs and birds. Conveniently, he left out the theology, the centuries of tradition, the sacred logic behind it all. To him, it was barbarism. To the Persians, it was cosmic upkeep, the maintenance of the world's balance. Think of it like two people locked in an argument about pineapple on pizza. Both sides absolutely convinced, both sides utterly baffled by the other. You shift uneasily as the last of the priests file out of the tower, leaving the birds to their solemn work. The gate shuts behind them with a dull echo. The silence that follows feels different from the hush of any cemetery you've known. No carved names. No epitaphs. No gentle inscriptions like Beloved Mother, 432 to 498 BC. Only sky, stone, and wings. Only silence remains, silence, and the slow beat of wings, anonymity etched in bone. And strangely enough, it works. The land is left untainted, the fire preserved in purity, and the cycle continues without end. As you make your way down the tower's narrow steps, the night air presses close against your skin. Your thoughts drift to your own rituals of remembrance, photographs on mantels, prayers whispered at gravesides, tombstones tended with flowers. Now picture all of it stripped away, leaving only stone, sky, and circling vultures. It feels severe, even cruel. Yet to the Persians, it was an act of mercy, releasing the soul without defiling the sacred elements. Mercy, after all, sometimes wears strange disguises. The next morning, you pass the tower again. In daylight, it looks almost ordinary. A simple ring of stone rising above scrubby hills. A shepherd leads his flock nearby, unconcerned with what transpires inside. Children chase one another through the dust, their laughter echoing across the slope, as though death were just another quiet neighbor. Here, life and death shared the same hilltop, and neither seemed to mind. You glance back once more. A single vulture rises into the air, wings wide, spiraling upward until it melts into the bright blue sky. And for a moment, you glimpse it as the Persians must have seen it. Not grotesque. Not horrific. But graceful, almost elegant. The body carried heavenward, the elements of earth and fire left unspoiled. In its unsettling way, it is beautiful. Dawn stretches across the Persian plateau, painting the mountains in pale ribbons of gold. But the scent that drifts toward you is not incense, nor the faint musk of birds. It is something sharper, acrid, unmistakable. A priest passes by, clutching a bronze jug with both hands, treating it as though it were filled with the rarest perfume in the empire. Curious, you lean in, only to recoil instantly. This is no fragrance. This is Gomez, consecrated bull's urine. Yes, you heard correctly. In ancient Persia, this wasn't a punchline or a mistake. To them, it was the ultimate purifier, a divine bleach strong enough to scrub away the very corruption of death. The danger, according to Zoroastrian priests, came from Nasu, the pollution unleashed at the moment life left a body. Imagine a demon that didn't attack with claws or shrieks, but one that seeped silently into the air, clinging to anyone who drew near. Touch a corpse, stand too close, even handle the tools of a corpse-bearer, and you risk carrying that taint. Not in the call in sick for a day sense, but in the You may unravel the entire cosmic order. Sense. Enter the temple's most unusual arsenal, jars of bull's urine, stored with care as though they were precious vintage wine. Only, this particular vintage wouldn't be featured on any tasting menu. Picture the ritual. You've brushed against a body, unfortunate, but inevitable. A priest leads you into a courtyard, seats you on your knees, and begins a liturgy as solemn as a wedding. He dips his hand into the sacred liquid and lets it pour slowly over your hands, your arms, sometimes even across your face. The odor clings stubbornly, like an overly affectionate relative who doesn't know when to let go. As he chants, bundles of twigs rustle in rhythm, and ashes are scattered into the mixture. At last, it is finished. You stand dripping, smelling like the inside of an abandoned cowshed, but purified. Cosmically spotless. The demons washed clean. A bath afterward? Entirely optional, but let's be honest, highly recommended. And the ritual didn't stop with the living. Even the dead themselves were bathed in Gomez before ever reaching the Tower of Silence. Think about that for a moment. You die, your family mourns, and before the vultures arrive, your body is ceremonially rinsed with consecrated cow's urine. You might have wished for flowers. What you received was farmyard disinfectant. One suspects that even if the Persians had discovered lemon-scented cleaners, they still would have chosen the cows. Because this wasn't about fragrance or freshness. It was about preserving cosmic order. Every tool that brushed against death, knives, stretchers, clothing, also had to be cleansed with the same ritual. Picture a blacksmith, hammering away at swords by day, only to be told he couldn't touch his hammer again until it had been dunked in bull's urine because his cousin had borrowed it to move a body. That's workplace contamination policy on an entirely different level. And here's the part that may surprise you. The priests didn't treat this as tedious labor. The rite of Patiab purification was solemn, sacred, drenched in chanting. Every pour of liquid, every sprinkle of ash, every whispered prayer had meaning. It wasn't ugh, this reeks. It was the harmony of the universe rests on this very splash. When you picture that seriousness, it becomes almost, dare we say, impressive. Like watching someone scrub a toilet with the gravity of a high priest. Naturally, outsiders were baffled. The Greeks, always eager for mockery, found the entire idea laughable. To them, cleanliness meant baths, olive oil rubs, and scraping away dead skin with bronze strigils. Imagine their horror when they learned Persians preferred to wash corpses with cow's urine. You can almost imagine the Greek reaction, a merchant spitting out his wine in disbelief, grumbling. These barbarians don't need cows, they need a proper bath. Yet to the Persians, the Greeks were the strange ones. You wash with oil, smear yourselves like roast lamb, and think we're the odd ones? Perspective really is everything. What stands out as you watch is the sheer thoroughness of the ritual. This wasn't a quick rinse. Purification required cycles, 3 times, 9 times, always odd numbers, believed to hold spiritual power. Each round demanded exact recitation of verses. The priest could not skip a word, could not stumble, could not miscount a pour. One mistake, and the entire ritual was void. It's like cosmic customer service. One wrong keystroke, and you have to start the complaint process all over again. You glance at the priest's face. There is no grimace, no pinched nose. To him, the liquid in the jug is not foul, it is holy. It has been collected from bulls raised with reverence near temples, animals chosen not for labor but for their symbolic strength. To you, it may smell unbearable. To him, it is sanctity in liquid form, weighty with divine meaning. 2 worlds collide in that single jug. And it wasn't just about corpses. Everyday pollution, touching something impure, breaking a taboo, could also demand this cleansing. Think of it as a cosmic spa treatment, if only spas smelled like barnyards. You can almost picture the scene, a Persian man returning home, his wife scolding. You stepped near the fire with dirty shoes again? Off to the temple! Don't come back until you're dripping and demon-free. Strange logic, perhaps. But in Persia, it was the logic that held the universe together. In Zoroastrian belief, the universe was split in two: Asha, truth, order, purity, and Druj, lies, chaos, filth. Every single action nudged the scales one way or the other. Washing with plain water wasn't enough, because even water could be polluted. But Gomez? That was the chosen weapon. A divine solvent against the Ruj. Their version of hazmat gear. Yes, it reeked. Yes, it was uncomfortable. But to them it worked. You can't help but wonder about the social side effects. Did the newly purified walk around smelling like barns for days? Was that odor worn proudly, as if to say, "Ah yes, he smells of the temple. Truly devout"? Or was it more like being trapped next to someone on the bus who's never discovered deodorant? The texts don't say. Maybe it was both, pride for some, misery for others. Imagine the cosmic ordeal of sitting through a feast beside Uncle Pure and Stinky. But there was a darker edge, too. Refusing purification wasn't harmless rebellion. If someone touched a corpse and refused the rites, they weren't just careless, they were a threat. Laws punished them severely. Refusal meant aligning with demons, endangering the fragile balance of the community. Some texts mention lashes, heavy fines, even death. Picture being hauled before a judge. Your crime, citizen, is refusing to let the priest bathe you in sacred cow urine. Absurd to our ears, but to them, it was no joke. The survival of purity was the survival of the cosmos itself. You watch as one such ritual unfolds. A young man kneels, pale and trembling, priests circling him in chant. He had carried his grandmother's body. Now his robe is soaked, his hair dripping, the sacred liquid running down his cheeks like a sheen of sweat. His eyes stay shut tight, whether from the sting of the liquid or the weight of shame, you can't quite tell. When the chanting finally fades, he rises. Spiritually clean, though not exactly fragrant. His family greets him with careful embraces, relief softening their faces. Gratitude, too. To them, nothing about this is absurd. It is sacred. And in their world it worked. The empire thrived. Roads unfurled across continents, gardens bloomed in the desert, kings ruled with awe and terror, while priests guarded it all with their bronze jugs of consecrated Gomez. You may laugh. You may wrinkle your nose. But in Persian eyes, this was civilization at its height. As you walk back from the courtyard, the images cling to you. Rows of jugs line like soldiers. Priests chanting, voices rising and falling. People kneeling as demons, invisible to all but faith, are washed away. The scent lingers in your imagination, sharp and unforgettable. And you realize something quietly unsettling. History is filled with customs that shock us only because we judge them through our own filters. To the Persians, they weren't bizarre at all. They were simply surviving, defending the universe one pore at a time. The morning sun creeps higher, spilling slanted beams across the temple courtyard. You're still reeling from what you've witnessed when another ritual drifts into view. This time, it isn't death that threatens purity, it's the leftovers of life itself. A priest approaches, holding a small bundle in his palm. At first glance, it looks harmless. A few strands of hair, a couple of clipped fingernails. Yet in the Zoroastrian mind, these scraps are no trivial waste. They are seeds of impurity, potential weapons in the hands of demons, tiny time bombs of chaos if carelessly discarded. Think your bathroom sink is messy? In ancient Persia, it would have been classified as a war zone. Every haircut, every nail trim wasn't grooming, it was the creation of dangerous fragments, scraps that had to be treated like hazardous waste. You didn't sweep them into a corner. You didn't feed them to animals. And you certainly didn't let them wash down into a river. Each strand, each clipping was a potential breach in cosmic order, as though your split ends were plotting to overthrow the universe. Here's how it worked. First, the trimmings were washed in consecrated bull's urine. Yes, the cosmic detergent returned, because even your fingernails needed their sacred rinse. Afterward, they were burned, but not in the main fire. That holy flame was too pure. Instead, a secondary fire, set aside for absorbing impurity, was used. Picture a priest solemnly dropping tiny nail clippings onto glowing pottery shards, chanting verses as they curled and smoked. The gravity of it is so intense, you almost laugh. Friends and family, we gather today to commend this thumbnail to eternity. Once reduced to ash, the remains were buried in pits dug far from anything sacred, never near rivers, never near gardens, never near the temple fire. Hair couldn't be allowed to drift into water, nails couldn't risk brushing against flame. Demons, after all, adored leftovers. To the Persians, careless disposal wasn't a small mistake. It was like leaving your refrigerator door open in August. Chaos swept in instantly. You can't help but picture the daily grind. Every haircut, every nail trim, a ritualized campaign against disorder. Picture it, parents snapping at children. Don't you dare leave that hair on the floor! Do you want to doom this entire family to cosmic collapse? Husbands grumbling about nail clippings, wives sighing and muttering. If demons want them, let them have them. And yet, despite the eye rolls, the rules had to be obeyed. Priests inspected, laws enforced. Break the code, and you risked unleashing invisible pollution that could taint not just the household, but an entire community. How different this feels from our world. Today, hair and nails are nothing, swept off salon floors, dumped in trash bins, rinsed down bathroom drains. At worst, a child plays a prank, or folklore imagines a witch using them for spells. But to the Persians, these scraps carried weight. They contained a trace of the self, still vulnerable to demonic capture. Carelessness wasn't just sloppy, it was spiritually reckless. The symbolism dug deep. Fire, water, earth, each element was holy, and none could be polluted. Once cut, hair and nails no longer carried the spark of life. They became fragments of death. Like corpses, they were pollutants, openings through which Druj, the demon of filth and lies, might slip in. Nothing was too small to matter. Casual clutter simply didn't exist in that worldview. Imagine being a teenager caught tossing nail clippings in a corner. Congratulations, son. You've personally endangered the cosmic order. And of course, the Greeks had something to say about all this. Herodotus, ever the reporter with a sly grin, recorded the Persian obsession with ritual purity. To him, it was baffling, almost laughable. Hair and nails treated like toxic waste? To the Greeks, this was paranoia run wild. But to the Persians, it was devotion carved into daily life. Two worlds colliding again. One culture shrugged. It's just a sandwich crust. The other warned. That crust could summon demons if it isn't burned correctly. Both certain, both horrified at the other's logic. Here's the cheeky detail. Some texts hint that Persians actually stored their clippings until they could be ritually destroyed. Imagine a woman sweeping strands of hair into a clay jar after combing, sealing it with wax, and setting it neatly on a shelf. A bizarre time capsule of every bad haircut you've ever had. Now picture archaeologists, centuries later, unearthing one of those jars. Behold, the sacred Tupperware of ancient Persia. And it wasn't always the same. Rituals could shift depending on circumstance. A soldier cutting his hair before battle, those clippings might be burned with extra prayers for protection. A pregnant woman trimming her nails, her scraps might be purified with additional care to guard both mother and child. What felt like ordinary grooming to us was, for them, an engagement with the cosmic battlefield. You clip your nails. They believed they were disarming demons. Of course, there was also a practical layer. Burning and burying hair and nails kept them from pests, vermin, or even falling into the hands of enemies who might use them for sorcery. Devotion and practicality. hand in hand. After all, across countless ancient cultures, hair and nail fragments were powerful ingredients in witchcraft, thought to bind, curse, or harm the person they once belonged to. Perhaps the Persians weren't so misguided. Their rules might have been equal parts cosmic theology and common sense caution. Better safe than sorry, especially if your neighbor's sorcerer was busy weaving a doll from your beard trimmings. Now imagine the lives of the priests saddled with this duty. Day after day, tiny heaps of hair and nail clippings passed into their care. They chanted, they burned, they buried. No glory, no spectacle, just the endless purification of the world's most unglamorous leftovers. You wonder if one of them ever sighed, "I trained 20 years for this." Yet in their eyes, every small ritual mattered. Each was a quiet victory in the eternal war of Asha, order, against the Ruj, the creeping filth of chaos. Picture a Persian household. A barber sweeps every strand into a clay jar. A mother scolds her child for biting nails and spitting them onto the floor. A priest makes his weekly rounds, gathering bundles of clippings for proper disposal. Neighbors whisper, "The family down the street didn't burn theirs last month. Now their goat is sick." Coincidence? Hardly. It may sound absurd, until you realize how deeply it structured daily life, stitching the cosmic into the domestic. And there lies the subtle beauty. In this obsession with purity, Persians believed they weren't just safeguarding their homes, they were preserving the balance of the world itself. A single clipping left in the wrong place wasn't just a careless slip. It was a crack in the universe. Life in Persia became a constant liturgy, where even trimming nails carried the weight of prayer. You glance at your own hands now, suddenly aware of their silent, steady growth. Imagine treating every clipping as a spiritual choice. Exhausting, yes, but also strangely humbling. For Persians, there was no split between sacred and ordinary. The battlefield between order and chaos stretched into every corner, even across your comb. So when a priest cast another burnt scrap into a burial pit, you understood, this wasn't superstition to them. It was duty. It was faith. It was the conviction that nothing, not even the smallest strand of hair, should be surrendered to disorder. And in that devotion, odd as it may seem to modern ears, you glimpse something fierce. A civilization determined not to let demons win. Not in palaces, not in battlefields, not even in the barber shop. You step away from the hearth where clippings smolder and follow a priest down a narrow path toward the river. The air cools, fresher now, carrying a low hum of rushing water long before it comes into view. At first it looks simple enough. A ribbon of blue cutting across the dusty plain, birds dipping low over the surface, reeds swaying in the breeze. But here, rivers were never just rivers. They were living goddesses, holy beings whose well-being determined the land's fate. Water wasn't merely wet, it was sacred, divine, and fragile. The goddess Aredvi Sura Anahita, called Aredvi or simply Ardvi by some, Ardvi Sura in hymns, was imagined as flowing life itself. She was mother of fertility, purifier of all things, a being to revere and to protect at all costs. And yet, paradoxically, water, the most sacred of all elements, could be polluted with alarming ease. A corpse drifting into the current, filth spilled at the banks, even stray nail clippings carried downstream, and suddenly the goddess herself was thought to fall ill. In the Persian worldview, pollution wasn't symbolic. It was literal. A river could sicken, weakened in its ability to nourish crops, animals, and people. Think of it as a cosmic plumbing system where every leak threatened disaster on a spiritual scale. Priests guarded waterways with the same vigilance you reserve for your Wi-Fi router. They patrolled the banks, eyes sharp for any hint of contamination. A farmer whose ox collapsed near the river might face harsh punishment if the carcass touched the water. Children learned early never to play too close, lest their dirt, or worse, their spit, slide into the goddess's body. Imagine the horror of sneezing too close to the water. Congratulations, child. You've just made the goddess ill. The rules extended everywhere, from mighty rivers to small wells, cisterns, even puddles left by rain. All had to be shielded, covered, protected. If someone drowned, that stretch of water was marked as tainted, sometimes avoided entirely until elaborate rites cleansed it. Ash scattered across the surface, fire kindled at the banks, priests chanting long prayers, and yes, Gomez poured in to purify. The same pungent liquid that washed corpses now served as detergent for rivers. A paradox indeed. Polluting water with cow urine was acceptable if it purged the greater demon lurking within. You can almost imagine the debates that followed. Did we cleanse the river, or just make it smell like a barn? When the pollution was minor, purification rituals might stretch on for days, wave after wave of chanting and offerings until the goddess was deemed restored. Priests circled the riverbanks, chanting into the night. Ash drifted across the surface like flakes of holy soap. Bundles of balsam twigs, symbols of cosmic order, were waved in steady rhythm, as if tapping out the heartbeat of creation itself. Each gesture was medicine for the goddess, each verse restoring her strength like a healer nursing a patient back to health. If pollution was severe, say a corpse decomposing in a well, the penalties were brutal. The offender could be flogged, heavily fined, or bound into servitude to the priests. Water was simply too vital to permit negligence. Better to destroy one man than to let an entire village sip corruption. You crouched by the bank, dipping your hands into the current. To you, it's just cool refreshment. But you notice the behavior of those around you. No one splashes. No one spits. A girl washes clothes, but never wrings them directly into the stream. A man brings goats to drink, keeping their hooves carefully on dry ground. This isn't etiquette, it's reverence. Sitting at the river's edge feels almost like being in a temple. And the law backed it up. Legal codes from Persia read like a plumbing manual fused with divine decree. 50 lashes for urinating near a stream. More for throwing waste into water. And if someone drowned a dog, an animal held sacred, in a river, the punishment multiplied sharply. Imagine a modern courtroom. Case 47. The accused spat in the village well. Sentence, 75 lashes. Justice and water sanitation rolled neatly into one. But this obsession wasn't just spiritual abstraction. Persia's very geography made water a matter of life and survival. Vast stretches of the Persian Empire lay across dry plateaus and deserts. Crops survived only through astonishing feats of irrigation. The qanats, underground channels carved for miles through rock and soil, carried cool mountain water down to villages, fields, and gardens. They were silent rivers flowing beneath your feet, hidden veins of life. But the qanats were not just engineering marvels. They were sacred arteries. To drop something impure into one wasn't merely careless, it was sabotage against the empire's lifeline. The punishment for such an act could be severe, even capital. This reverence flowed into mythology. In the hymns of the Avesta, Eredvi Sura Anahita is praised as luminous, strong, and ever-flowing. The rivers were described as her daughters, racing across the land to wash away filth, protect the innocent, and fight demons. Priests sang of water as a warrior, its weapon not fire or steel, but freshness itself. You can almost imagine the chant rising on the wind, Eredvi Sura Anahita, mighty and spotless, bringer of life's bounty. Picture if every time you turned on a tap, you whispered a prayer to the goddess flowing through your pipes. For Persians, it was never just water. It was divinity in motion. Yet with that reverence came fear. Purity was precious and fragile. A drowned animal, a careless traveler, even a stray hair could transform blessing into curse. That fragility demanded vigilance. Fetching water was no trivial chore. It was ritual. Where you stood, how you poured, what touched the vessel, all of it mattered. Even a weary traveler filling his skin had to tread carefully. Drink, yes, but pollute, never. And as always, outsiders looked on with a mixture of disbelief and mockery. The Greeks, splashing in open baths and treating water like a toy, mocked the Persians as uptight. Herodotus, ever ready with disdain, saw paranoia where Persians saw piety. But in a land dependent on fragile qanats and scarce rivers, maybe their caution was less superstition and more survival instinct dressed as theology. Lose a single clean river, and famine lurked close behind. Pollute a village well, and you could condemn an entire community. In Persia, practicality and religion fused so tightly they became one and the same. Picture a crisis. A cow tumbles into a well. Panic ripples through the village. They can't simply draw water from somewhere else. Sources are too few, too precious. The priests are called. They arrive with chanting voices, bundles of twigs, jars of gomez, brass bowls filled with ash. Ropes are lowered, the carcass hauled out, and then the rituals begin. For days the priests circle, sprinkle, purify, chant. Families wait on the edge of thirst, praying the water will be restored. Finally, the priests declare the well cleansed, Eredvi renewed. The people drink again, grateful, whispering thanks to the goddess herself. To you, it looks like ritual theater. To them, it was survival. And then there were the punishments. Imagine being caught sneaking waste into a stream under cover of night. Dragged before a magistrate, you're charged not with littering but with wounding a goddess. Witnesses testify, priests denounce, and the sentence comes swift. Lashes. Public humiliation. Your name etched in gossip for years. There goes the man who tried to poison the river. Social death clung as tightly as the stripes on your back. What lingers with you isn't the punishment, it's how personal it all felt. Water wasn't just resource or element. It was a being, and harming it was betrayal. For Persians, rivers were never mere resources. They were beings, alive, vulnerable, capable of being wounded or healed. When priests poured ash into polluted water, they weren't simply disinfecting. They were tending to Eredvi, nursing her back to health. When a polluter was punished, it wasn't the correction of a lawbreaker but vengeance for an insulted goddess. Every ripple carried moral weight. Every drop became a battlefield in the eternal struggle between order and chaos. You lean closer to the stream, watching your reflection quiver on the surface. Your thoughts drift to your own world, where taps gush on command, drains swallow without notice, and rivers are ignored until they flood or run dry. In Persia, such forgetfulness was unthinkable. Water demanded reverence, demanded vigilance, demanded ritual. In their eyes, only that devotion could keep the world intact. And so you linger at the bank, listening to the blend of murmuring current and low chanting voices. Once again, you're struck by how strict, how strange, and yet, how unexpectedly beautiful their worldview was. The goddess flows on, guarded by priests, feared by children, honored in hymns, and kept pure through punishments as much as prayers. To you, shocking. To them, simply the rhythm of life. A covenant with divinity, drop by drop. The murmur of the river fades behind you as you follow a dusty path toward a courtyard where voices grow sharper, more urgent. This is no marketplace filled with figs and dates, nor a temple thick with incense. It is a courtroom. And if you're picturing robes, gavels, and neat stacks of parchment, think again. In Persia, justice wasn't left to men alone. In Persia, truth wasn't always decided by reason or debate. It was revealed by the gods, sometimes in ways that send a chill down your spine, sometimes in ways that make you laugh nervously, praying you're never the one on trial. A scribe sits nearby, stylus scratching into clay tablets, while petitioners argue, voices raised, hands slicing the air with frantic gestures. But when the priest judges raise their hands for silence, it isn't to deliver a verdict shaped by logic. It is to declare that the gods themselves will decide, through ordeal. Here, truth wasn't uncovered by speeches. It was drawn out with fire, metal, and a haunting sense of divine theater. You watch as a man is led forward. The charge theft. He hasn't been caught in the act, No witnesses swear against him, only an accusation. But in a society where lies were considered spiritual contagion, how do you prove honesty? The priests bring forth a shallow metal dish, its rim glowing from the coals. Into it they pour molten brass, shimmering like liquid sunlight, bubbling with menace. The accused is told, plunge your hand in, retrieve the stone lying at the bottom. Your stomach knots. Surely, this cannot be serious. Yet the priests nod gravely. To them, the logic is clear. If innocent, the sacred fire will shield him. If guilty, the burns themselves will betray him as a liar. This wasn't cruelty in their eyes, it was justice. A way for the gods to speak directly. To you, it feels like some cosmic game show where the prize is escaping infection. The man hesitates, sweat glistening on his brow. The crowd leans forward, murmuring. He thrusts his hand into the molten metal, seizes the stone, and rips it out, fist clenched tight. The priests bind the man's arm in linen, chanting softly. The trial is not finished yet. For days his wound will be watched. If the burns close cleanly, it proves the gods have shielded him, truth shining through. But if the flesh festers, guilt will have made itself visible. Imagine waiting for your court verdict while your arm blisters in slow agony. Justice by dermatology. And molten metal wasn't the only ordeal. Sometimes the test was firewalking, bare feet across glowing embers, trusting divine favor to keep the souls unburned. Other times it was swallowing a potion laced with sulfur or ash, the priest's voice weaving prayers over the bowl. If the accused vomited quickly and lived, innocence was declared. If the stomach refused to yield, or worse, the verdict was clear, chaos had claimed another liar. Think of it as a lie detector, except the machine might set you on fire. Here's the strange twist. To Persians, these ordeals weren't horrifying, they were merciful. Instead of endless disputes, gossip, and doubt, the gods gave a verdict no man could contest. Fire did not lie. The divine could not misjudge. What looks to you like a lawsuit handled by pyrotechnics felt to them like swifter, purer justice than any lawyer's argument. This obsession with truth ran deeper than courts. In Zoroastrian thought, lying wasn't just impolite, it was one of the gravest sins. To speak falsehood was to side with the Ruj, the demon of deceit. Each lie polluted the very fabric of creation. That's why ordeals mattered. They weren't just about one accused man, they were cosmic checkpoints, proof that truth itself remained intact. Imagine if every small fib, every "sorry, I forgot to water the plants," could earn you a walk across hot coals. Suddenly, honesty starts to look far more appealing. Around the courtyard, another case begins. This time, a woman is accused of poisoning her neighbor. The priests don't summon molten brass. Instead, they prepare a ritual oath. She places her hand beside the sacred fire and swears aloud to her innocence. If she lies, the fire, alive, divine, will mark her eventually. Maybe not that instant, but illness, misfortune, or disaster will betray her guilt in time. The community accepts this as surely as you accept the sunrise. The fire cannot be deceived. The Greeks, of course, were scandalized. Herodotus and others described these ordeals with a mix of fascination and contempt. To them, law was argument, precedent, debate. Persians, in their eyes, abandoned reason and handed justice to fate and flame. Yet, in truth, Greek courts weren't models of rational clarity either. They leaned on oracles, rhetoric, and juries swayed by emotion. Perhaps Persians had simply chosen a different theater, less shouting, more burning. And the punishments, when guilt was proven, were often severe. Thieves could lose ears or noses, branded forever by disfigurement. Traitors might be flayed alive, their skin displayed as a warning. Lesser crimes were met with lashings or fines, though fines weren't paid in coins but in livestock, grain, or forced service. Yet even in punishment, the theme remained constant: justice as purification. Every lash, every cut, every ordeal was not merely punishment but an act of cosmic housekeeping, scrubbing away filth before it could spread. You pause and imagine yourself living in such a world. Would you ever dare to lie, to steal, to whisper gossip? You might think twice before slipping an extra fig into your basket if you knew a priest could one day hand you a steaming ladle of molten brass. Even sarcasm might feel risky. Nice sandals could be mistaken for mockery, and suddenly you're choking down sulfur water in front of an entire crowd. And yet, beneath the severity, there was order. Persian courts were structured. Records were inscribed, witnesses summoned, testimony weighed. It wasn't all ordeal and fire. But the possibility of ordeal lingered in the background, the ultimate tiebreaker. When men could not decide, the gods would. In this way, Persian justice married practicality with ritual. A thief might be tried as in any land, but the threat of divine fire hovering nearby kept tongues straighter, hearts more cautious. To the people, oddly, this wasn't terrifying. It was reassuring. Ordeals, though chilling to you, gave closure to them. Arguments ended swiftly. Verdicts carried weight beyond question. Who could accuse a judge of bias when the verdict was sealed by flame? Brutal fairness, wrapped in chant and spectacle. As you watch another trial unfold, it strikes you, this courtyard is not merely a courtroom. It is both theater and temple. Here, justice isn't about individual rights but about defending the cosmic order. To lie is not to inconvenience a neighbor, but to wound creation itself. To steal is not to take property, but to invite chaos into the empire. Every verdict is less about the accused and more about keeping the world aligned with truth. When the session ends, the crowd disperses, many murmuring prayers as they go. Some leave satisfied, others uneasy. You remain behind, unsettled, the echo of chants and fire still hanging in the air. To you, the ordeal seems savage, unjust, and even terrifying. Yet for them, it was an ordinary, even essential part of life. What jars your modern sense of fairness was, in their eyes, nothing more than another day's case to settle. You steal one last look at the fire pit, its fading embers glowing softly in the dark. To the Persians, those dying coals represented truth itself, burning steadily without falter. They believed that within the heat, lies could not endure, that deception would blister away under its flame. However strange it may sound now, in their world of purity and corruption, order and chaos, such faith formed the very bedrock of justice. You still feel the warmth of that imagined courtroom clinging to your skin as you step back into the palace gardens. Yet the next revelation does not come through fire or judgment. It arrives through love, or at least through what Persians recognized as sacred and rightful love. You might think you've already seen enough strangeness. Vultures devouring the dead, priests clutching jars of urine, or trials conducted beside molten brass. But nothing quite prepares you for the practice that startled even hardened Greek envoys. Here, marriages between close relatives were not merely allowed, but celebrated. The Persians honored a union known as zita, a marriage bond joining the nearest of kin. Brother and sister, mother and son, father and daughter, relationships that strike modern ears as forbidden whispers were, to them, solemn acts of devotion to the cosmic order. You can almost hear your own inner voice protesting, wait, that was acceptable? But to Persians, it wasn't just acceptable, it was holy. Zoroastrian teaching framed kin marriage as a safeguard of cosmic balance, binding families tightly together, preventing delusion, and keeping purity intact. For Persians, marrying outside the family was fine, but marrying within it was better, and the closer the blood, the higher the honor. They saw such unions as a way of fusing bloodlines into a fortress, guarding against disorder and chaos. These marriages were believed to delight the gods, fortify the community, and shield the world from the creeping corruption of Druj. Picture your mother arranging a match for you and proudly announcing, "He's your cousin, a solid choice. But if your sister's available, that's even better." To Greek and later Roman visitors, this was unthinkable. Herodotus himself wrote with equal parts revulsion and fascination, recording stories of Persians marrying their sisters without hesitation. Other chroniclers whispered of kings wedding their daughters and brothers keeping their sisters as wives. To foreign eyes, it was monstrous. But to Persians, it was not wickedness, it was maintenance of cosmic order. The closer the bond, the greater the merit. Of course, not every Persian household practiced this, and not every Zoroastrian arranged sibling marriages. Yet the religious text spoke with unmistakable approval. Priests composed hymns in honor of those who embraced it, promising heavenly rewards for their courage. Some records went so far as to declare that marrying one's own mother was the most virtuous act a man could perform, a claim that leaves modern minds spinning in disbelief. Once again, perspective shifts everything. To us, it reeks of scandal and taboo. To them, it was nothing less than salvation. Imagine standing inside a royal court where a young prince is about to wed his sister. The hall gleams with garlands, music fills the air, and priests chant blessings, proclaiming the marriage as a bulwark against chaos itself. Guests shower the pair with flowers, clapping joyously. And there you are, shrinking into the corner, wishing the ground would swallow you, while every instinct in your modern self screams, "This is wrong." To Persians, such unions radiated virtue. And so you're left wondering, what's more astonishing, their embrace of the practice, or your own disbelief centuries later? The reasoning behind it wasn't purely religious either. Politics had its hand in it as well. Royal dynasties often turned to close-kin marriage as a tool to protect their power. By keeping marriages within the family, they kept bloodlines intact and alliances firmly under control. Egyptian pharaohs had done much the same, and Persians, at times, mirrored that very strategy. Power wasn't spread outward, it was folded tightly inward. Inside the royal harem, already a boiling pot of rivalries and intrigue, the politics only grew denser when wives and sisters became the same people. It reads almost like a scandalous drama penned by someone who had enjoyed a bit too much wine. But beyond the palace walls, the practice took on a different face. While kings and nobles showcased the most extreme unions, ordinary families usually engaged in milder forms. Cousin marriage, for instance, was not only accepted but praised as virtuous. A girl promised to her cousin wasn't a subject of gossip, she was thought of as lucky. Villagers whispered admiration, not disgust. One can almost hear mothers at the village well boasting, "My daughter wed her cousin, such purity, such blessing!" Still, it would be wrong to paint this as universally joyful. For countless women, these unions weren't chosen freely but pressed upon them. To resist was to defy the cosmic order, to invite priestly condemnation, and to disgrace one's family. Love as we understand it today, romantic, personal, guided by individual choice, rarely entered the equation. If affection blossomed later, that was a fortunate accident. If not, the marriage continued regardless. What mattered wasn't personal happiness, but whether the family aligned itself with the eternal struggle between purity and chaos. Picture yourself in a quiet village, trimming your nails as you listen to the priest's sermon. His voice rises, declaring that marrying your kin is the holiest deed a person could perform. In that moment, the weight of expectation presses down like a stone. The pressure to conform must have been overwhelming. Who would dare resist when the very reward promised was a place in heaven? And so, generation after generation, the practice threaded itself into daily life, utterly scandalous to outsiders, yet perfectly natural to those within. Myth itself reinforced the tradition. In Zoroastrian cosmology, the very first humans were said to be brother and sister who married in order to populate the world. Their union wasn't condemned, it was celebrated as heroic, a sacred model for all who followed. Priests repeated the story endlessly as proof, if the first humans did this, then so should you. When your origin story begins with siblings as holy spouses, the rest of the doctrine falls neatly into place. Of course, the Greeks couldn't resist embellishment. They loved to portray Persians as lustful, shameless, drowning in scandalous marriages. What may have been rare in Persia was painted in Greek gossip as if it were universal. After all, few accusations discredit an enemy faster than claiming they sleep with their own sisters. Still, Persian writings tell their own tale. Hymns, law codes, and priestly commentaries speak clearly, openly praising the union they called Wadoda. Whether or not every family practiced it, the tradition was unquestionably honored. Imagine, then, the tension at diplomatic banquets. A Greek envoy, smiling politely, listening as Persians raise their cups in solemn toasts to the holiness of kin marriage. He lifts his own wine reluctantly, choking back a sip, and later scribbles in his diary, "Dear Athens, please remind me never to let my sister travel to Persia." You can almost hear the sarcasm bleeding through the centuries. Yet beneath the awkwardness lies a striking truth. The Persians weren't ashamed. There were no whispers behind closed doors, no hidden ceremonies. It was public, ritualized, and celebrated. They stood by it, not as scandal, but as virtue. It's the confidence that unsettles you most. In your world, taboos hide in shadows, whispered at midnight. In theirs, the same taboo marched boldly down palace corridors adorned with garlands and song. And here politics intertwined with family. Behind the lattice screens of the harem, royal women wielded enormous influence. When sisters and daughters became wives, it wasn't only a matter of scandal, it was a matter of power. As consorts, they produced sons who were doubly royal, children with bloodlines so tightly wound that their legitimacy could hardly be questioned. Outsiders might cry incest, but insiders proclaimed divine blessing. What did it mean for those women themselves? Some must have felt it as an honor, others as a crushing burden. A few perhaps relished the influence it brought, while others dreaded the obligations. Their voices are mostly lost to us, drowned beneath the chants of priests and the writings of Greek men. And yet, you can almost picture it, a young bride walking silently through palace corridors, veiled, fully aware that her husband was also her brother. Did she feel chosen? Or trapped? Perhaps both at once. And what of their children? Were they seen as flawed, tainted? Quite the opposite. Offspring of close communions were celebrated, believed to be pure, blessed, even destined for greatness. In the royal courts, such children carried an aura of inevitability. They weren't whispered about as weak or inbred, they were declared heirs by divine right. Another complete reversal of your instincts. The tradition endured for centuries, echoing through law codes long after Greeks and Romans mocked it. Priests continued to praise Suda, holding it aloft as a sacred duty, even as foreign criticism spread. Only under new empires, with shifting faiths and fresh moral orders, did the practice finally wither away, no longer exalted, but condemned as scandal. For that long Persian moment in history, kin marriage was not merely accepted, it was revered. You sit quietly in the garden, trying to process it. A union that makes you recoil in disgust was, to them, an act of cosmic virtue. What you see as scandal, they embraced as salvation. Once again, history flips the coin of perspective. What shocks you now was, in their eyes, the holiest of deeds. Night begins to settle. The palace walls shimmer gold beneath the torchlight, while inside, family feasts and family unions blur together without distinction. To Persians, this was order, this was purity, this was alignment with the very first humans. To you, it is a paradox, fascinating yet deeply unsettling. Just another entry in the long catalogue of things that once passed as normal. The evening deepens. Torches send restless shadows crawling across carved columns, and once again you are led further into the palace. You have already witnessed vultures circling the dead, ashes scattered to the wind, jars of urine clutched by priests, nails trimmed as holy offerings, fiery ordeals, and marriages that to you seem unthinkable. You feel certain nothing could surprise you anymore. And then you step into the grand hall. Here, you realize Persia's strangeness lies not only in its rituals of death and marriage, but also in its theater of power. For here, the ruler is approached not as a man, but as something more, something nearly beyond human. The hall towers above you like a cavern sculpted in stone and gold. Along the walls, rows of reliefs depict processions of tribute bearers, Persians in flowing robes, Elamites, Egyptians, Indians, each carrying gifts for their sovereign. Every surface gleams, gold catching and multiplying the torchlight, bouncing across polished tiles. And there, at the far end, upon a platform so high you half expect him to brush the ceiling with his crown, sits the King of Kings. He is not merely a monarch, but a cosmic pivot, the living axis chosen by Ahura Mazda to guard order against chaos. When a noble steps forward to present his tribute, he does not simply bow politely. He does not nod or incline his head, as you might before a modern dignitary. Instead, he hurls himself flat to the ground, arms stretched forward, forehead pressed hard against the stone floor. This is proskynesis, a full-body prostration, considered the only fitting gesture before a ruler whose very presence radiates divinity. One after another, men collapse before the throne like waves breaking against the shore. Generals, powerful governors, even wealthy satraps who rule provinces the size of entire kingdoms, all sink down, bodies flattened like woven rugs beneath the weight of the king's authority. The message could not be clearer. In Persia, the king is not simply first among equals. He is the axis of the cosmos, and you are but dust in his presence. The rules of the court are strict and unforgiving. No one dares address the king casually. No one meets his gaze unless explicitly invited. To do so is not boldness, it is blasphemy. Even the highest nobles shuffle forward with lowered eyes, their voices unsteady. If the king so much as raises a finger, servants rush forward instantly. If his brow tightens in displeasure, the entire hall falls silent at once. His moods ripple outward like storm clouds stretching across an empire. Imagine living in a world where your entire future could be decided by whether the folds of your robe appeared tidy or wrinkled in his sight. And yet, despite the trembling fear, there is reverence. For Persians, this was not humiliation but an honor. To lie face down before the King of Kings was to recognize the very order of the universe itself. He was the representative of Ahura Mazda, the divine guardian of Asha, truth, light, and cosmic harmony. By bowing to him, you weren't merely bowing to a man. You were bowing to the principle that kept the world from falling into chaos. For Persians, bowing was not debasement, it was participation in the sacred order. Outsiders, however, bristled at the sight. The Greeks in particular seethed with indignation. To them, only gods deserve such total prostration. Centuries later, when Alexander conquered Persia and tried to adopt proskynesis, his Macedonian companions erupted in fury. "We bow to no man," they cried. "Not even you." But here, long before Alexander's time, Persians bent the knee willingly, even eagerly. What the Greeks condemned as servility was, to Persians, simply the etiquette of empire. Your gaze drifts back to the throne. The king's robe shimmers, heavy with embroidered beasts, lions leaping, bulls charging, eagles frozen in mid-flight. His beard is curled with meticulous care. Upon his head rises a crown shaped like a miniature ziggurat, tier upon tier. Around him stand the immortals, his elite guards, their spears capped with silver, their patterned robes immaculate. Behind him linger scribes holding wax tablets, eunuchs waving broad fans, attendants carrying cloths and towels. He is never alone, never unguarded, never anything less than spectacle. And here's the striking detail. Not even the immortals dare meet his eyes. These are men who would kill at a gesture, yet even they stand slightly bent, their gazes lowered to the floor or cast toward the horizon. The lesson is clear. No matter how close you stand to the king, you must never forget that he is untouchable. He is not comrade, not friend, but cosmic fire made flesh. Every ritual reinforces this truth. At meals, he eats first while the court waits, trembling for permission to begin. When he drinks, the hall thunders with toasts to his name. When he speaks, scribes rush to record each word, treating even a casual remark about the weather as though it were scripture destined to be carved into stone. In an empire where lying itself was seen as cosmic corruption, the king's word carried extraordinary weight. Truth was whatever he declared it to be. If he announced that the sky was purple, priests could summon hymns to prove it so. And yet you can't help but wonder about the loneliness hidden behind such grandeur. Did these kings ever long for a moment of unguarded honesty, for someone to meet their eyes without trembling? Did they crave a simple conversation unchained from ritual and flattery? Perhaps. But the system allowed no cracks. To let the mask slip was to risk shattering the illusion of divinity. And so the king lived inside an endless theater, applauded, feared, revered, never touched without permission, never addressed without rehearsed words. This wasn't confined to nobles and courtiers. Even common subjects, when granted an audience, fell flat upon the floor. Picture a farmer from distant Bactria, dusty from weeks of travel, clutching a basket of melons as tribute. He steps into the radiant hall, his heart hammering, eyes catching the glitter of the throne, and instantly he collapses, face pressed to the stone, until summoned to rise. His prayers are twofold, not only that his melons might be accepted, but that his posture itself pleases the king. One wrong movement, a poorly timed glance, a gesture that appeared clumsy, any of these could invite punishment. And punishment for failing to prostrate properly was no light matter. Accounts speak of nobles executed for showing insufficient reverence. Refusal wasn't seen as rudeness, it was treason. You weren't merely insulting the man on the throne. You were defying the cosmic order itself. And in Persia, rebels against the cosmos met brutal, swift ends. Better to endure the ache of a stiff back from endless bowing than to risk losing your head. Yet Persians themselves didn't see it as groveling. They saw it as alignment. Just as rivers commanded reverence, just as fire demanded purity, so too the king demanded submission. Not for his ego, though no doubt it pleased him, but for the stability of the universe itself. The Persian Empire sprawled across continents, stretching from the valleys of India to the shores of Greece, from burning deserts to snow-capped mountains. Holding such a vast world together required more than swords and soldiers. It required ritual, an unshakable theater of divinity embodied in a single man. And it worked. Tribes who would never bow to one another all bowed to the King of Kings. Egyptians, Babylonians, Lydians, Medes, different tongues, different gods, yet all pressed their foreheads to the same stone floor. The ritual dissolved boundaries. It proclaimed one cosmic order under one throne. Even if bitterness simmered in private, the act of bowing drilled obedience into the body. It was propaganda, religion, and discipline, all contained in one simple command: fall down. And then, of course, came the banquets. If prostration was the solemn ritual, feasting was its jubilant echo. Picture the hall transformed, tables stretching endlessly, heaped with roasted meats, fragrant rice, honeyed fruits, mountains of bread. Wine flows without end, but even here the hierarchy holds firm. Each guest raises their cup only to toast the king, chanting his titles, praising his triumphs. Musicians fill the air with sharp rhythms, dancers spin in dazzling circles, and yet beneath the laughter, every gaze flicks nervously toward the throne. If the king smiles, the room bursts into cheer. If he frowns, silence falls instantly, heavy as a dropped curtain. Even joy itself must be staged. You sip your watered wine, hand trembling, careful not to spill a drop. The guest beside you leans in and whispers, "Do not raise your head too quickly when you drink. It may be taken as arrogance." You nod, throat tight, realizing that even the simple act of swallowing has been swallowed itself by ritual. Outsiders, again, found the whole spectacle unbearable. Greeks muttered that Persians had shackled themselves willingly, turning mortal kings into living gods. But Persians merely shrugged. To them, what the Greeks called freedom was chaos. And order, true, sacred order, was kneeling. You can't help but compare this to your own world, where celebrities are treated almost like sacred figures. Suddenly, Persia doesn't seem quite as foreign as you first imagined. Replace flaming torches with camera flashes, and swap out priests for paparazzi, and perhaps the difference isn't so great after all. As the banquet draws to an end, the king slips away behind a curtain, while courtiers remain bowed to the floor, unmoving even long after his departure. One by one, with cautious movements and aching necks, they begin to lift themselves, whispering softly about the ruler's mood. You realize that for days they'll dissect every detail, every glance, every pause, each slight shift in expression. Did he smile for long enough? Did a shadow of displeasure cross his face? Did he drink less wine than usual? In a society where the king embodied the very balance of the cosmos, even his digestion could be read as a divine sign. You leave the chamber unsettled, caught between awe and disbelief. To live under such a system demanded constant vigilance over posture, words, even the direction of your gaze. It meant shaping your entire body into ritual, bowing not only before a man, but before the universe itself. And here again, the paradox confronts you. What feels to you like humiliation was, for the Persians, an act of sacred devotion. What you interpret as empty flattery was for them a way of surviving, even achieving salvation. Another fragment of their normal that twists your perspective. Another strange mirror reflecting your own assumptions back at you. The sound of sandals slapping against stone fades as you step out of the throne hall. But before you can steady your breath, a new rhythm reaches your ears, the chime of cups, the ripple of laughter, the gentle hum of flutes. If prostration was the ritual of power, then feasting was the ritual of belonging. And here in Persia, a feast was no polite, quiet supper. It was something far greater. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a marathon of indulgence that could stretch across several days, with food in endless supply and, above all else, rivers of wine. You push open the doors of the banquet hall, and the first thing that assaults your senses is the aroma. Roasted lamb rubbed with coriander fills the air, figs drip with golden honey, and heaps of saffron rice steam like little mountains of gold. Then your eyes adjust, and the sight nearly overwhelms you. Tables stretch farther than you can track, bending under the weight of platters piled with dates, nuts, cheeses, fish, and bread stacked in great towers like miniature ziggurats. But above it all, standing with the presence of gods among mortals, are the wine jars. Enormous clay amphorae, their sides stained from years of pouring, loom ready to keep the night alive. The Persians loved their wine deeply, but they weren't reckless about it. They followed rules. The drink was almost always cut with water. To them, gulping wine straight was barbaric, a dangerous slide into chaos. Dilution preserved order, stretched out the night, and allowed the feast to last not just hours, but days. Picture it, a guest raises his cup. Half water, half wine, yet fully ritual. A toast to the king, to the gods, to truth itself. By the 10th round you'd expect bodies collapsing under the tables. Instead they pressed on, bound by custom. Each guest was required to drink in lockstep with the others. If one person drank, everyone drank. If a toast was made, the whole hall lifted their cups together. Imagine your office holiday party under a rule that every single sip of eggnog had to be mirrored by the entire group. Now stretch that across 3 long days, and replace the eggnog with potent Shiraz wine, and you begin to grasp what Persian banqueting truly meant. And the drinking was only half the spectacle. The music never faltered. Lutes hummed steadily, flutes shrieked sharp and bright, drums pounded like heartbeats, and dancers spun across the floor, their veils catching the torchlight in flashes of fire. Storytellers stood at the center, weaving epics of legendary heroes and long-dead kings. A Persian banquet was never just about food and drink, it was equal parts carnival and classroom, entertainment mingled with instruction. Each toast, each performance, carried meaning. You weren't simply drinking, you were part of a ritual that proclaimed, "We are united. We are strong. We live in order." Wine, in this world, was far more than alcohol. It was the glue that held a vast empire together, a shared intoxication that blurred borders and bound strangers into one people. Of course, such rituals weren't without their critics. Outsiders scoffed at the Persians, branding them drunkards. Herodotus even claimed they made decisions twice, once while inebriated, and again when sober, just to see if the verdicts matched. Imagine your local city council holding a meeting with pitchers of wine flowing freely, deciding whether goats should be banned from sidewalks, then reconvening the next morning, bleary-eyed, to double-check if the idea still seemed wise. Absurd, yes, but also oddly practical. If both drunk you and sober you agreed, maybe the policy actually had weight. Guests at these feasts poured in from every corner of the empire. Egyptians arrived with honeyed beer, Indians brought fragrant spices, Greeks contributed olive oil. They carried tribute, but just as importantly, they carried their thirst. Banquets became cultural crossroads. You can almost hear the conversations at the table. "In my country, we drink it straight. In mine, we chew betel nut. Here in Persia, friend, we dilute." And then came the unspoken ultimatum: drink, or risk insulting the king. Refusal wasn't a polite decline, it was practically a declaration of war. And the sheer scale of these gatherings staggers the imagination. Some accounts claim that feasts fed not hundreds, but tens of thousands. Cooks labored in endless shifts, soldiers balanced trays, servants poured without pause. Supplies flowed like an unbroken tide, wine jars carted in by caravan, spices dragged from India, lambs slaughtered by the hundreds. If today's music festivals run on oceans of energy drinks, Persia's great festivals ran on rivers of wine. You find yourself seated at the endless table, your cup trembling slightly in your hand. The nobleman beside you, a well-fed lord from Susa, flashes you a grin and lifts his own vessel high. "To the King of Kings!" The hall thunders, and you scramble to lift your cup in time. Another toast follows, then another, and another still. Before long, you've lost all track of the count. Each round blurs seamlessly into the next, the wine flowing as steadily as the music. Your head feels light, your steps unsteady, yet the noble beside you only grins wider. "Now," he slurs cheerfully, "we talk politics." And with that, you're pulled straight into one of Persia's strangest and most famous customs, discussing matters of state in the middle of a banquet, cups still in hand. To your modern mind, the idea seems absurd. Wouldn't alcohol cloud judgment? Perhaps it did, but the Persians valued the loosened tongue. To them, drunken words carried weight. Secrets spilled, masks slipped, and true feelings were revealed in the haze of wine. It was dangerous, of course. A careless remark could end a career. But it was also trusted. They believed a man's sincerity shone brightest when intoxication stripped away his caution. In their eyes, wine was less a drink and more a kind of truth serum. And once the wine speech was finished, decisions could be checked again in sobriety. Picture, if you will, a modern parliament adopting the same method: tequila shots before the session, debate after. Ridiculous, yes, but strangely practical. If both drunk you and sober you agreed, perhaps the idea had real merit. Not that everyone enjoyed the practice. Across the hall you spot one poor man swaying on his feet, his face pale as wax, pretending to sip while secretly trying to hide his cup. But attendants kept sharp eyes. Cups were to be drained, refills poured without mercy. To refuse was an insult. To falter was humiliation. By the end, guests staggered out in all directions, some carried by friends, some retching in courtyards, others still singing hymns to the sacred fire with voices hoarse and broken. And yet, no one questioned the ritual. This was how Persia bound bodies and souls to throne, to king, to cosmos itself. The Greeks, of course, scoffed. They painted Persians as decadent, soft, ruined by excess and drink. Yet the irony stings, because the Greeks themselves loved their wine. Their symposiums were legendary for drinking and debate. The difference lay in pride. Greeks championed moderation. Persians exalted unity. For the Greeks, wine served as a doorway to philosophy, a companion to debate and reflection. For the Persians, the very same drink was something else entirely, a tool for loyalty, a vessel that bound men to each other and to their king. Two cultures, one substance, yet completely different meanings poured into the cup. Beyond politics, the banquet was the heartbeat of Persian society. Weddings, victories, festivals, each one centered on food and wine. Even funerals included feasts, though priests made sure the tables stood far from the bodies of the dead. Wine marked beginnings and endings alike. It celebrated births, mourned deaths, sealed alliances, and even cleansed the soul after ordeals. To drink together was to share destiny. To drink alone was, at best, suspicious. And of course, there was humor. Picture the scene: the toasts grow looser, sillier, as the night drags on. Someone shouts, "To the goats!" And without hesitation the entire court rises, cups lifted high in honor of goats. A dancer stumbles mid-step, and the hall bursts into laughter. A noble boasts he can balance his cup on his head, only for wine to cascade down his robe, soaking his fine silk. To Persians, such moments weren't shameful. They were communal, little stitches of embarrassment that tied everyone closer together. Guests left the feast not just with aching heads but with stories, laughter, and bonds that lingered long after the wine had dried. Yet beneath the revelry lurked danger. Drunken words could be as sharp as daggers. A careless insult toward a tax collector might carry back to the king. A drunken confession of forbidden love could ignite scandal. Banquets were both glue and snare, binding, yes, but also exposing. They lifted reputations, but they could just as easily ruin them. As you sway at the long table, cup trembling in your hand, the paradox strikes you once again. To your modern sensibilities, compulsory drinking feels stifling, even reckless. But to Persians, it was something entirely different: joy, duty, sacred ritual. Outsiders mocked them as slaves to their wine. Yet in their own eyes, they weren't enslaved at all. They were united. The feast drags deep into the night, torches sputtering low while the music climbs toward a fever pitch. A storyteller rises, his voice booming as he recites the epic of Rostam, Persia's great hero. The hall erupts in cheers, cups lifted high once again. You hear your own voice joining the chorus, shouting until the words blur together. For a brief moment, you forget your distance, your shock, your doubts. For a brief moment you belong. Another soul woven into the empire's fabric, bound by wine, ritual, and roar. By the time dawn creeps pale across the horizon, the banquet hall looks like a battlefield of exhaustion. Bodies sprawl across carpets, nobles slump against carved columns, and a few stubborn voices still mumble half-finished toasts into the air. Servants move with careful steps, gathering empty cups, preparing amphorae for the next round. Because here in Persia, sunrise did not signal an end. Feasts could stretch on, day after day, until the king or the priests finally decreed enough. You stagger into the courtyard, blinking against the white blaze of daylight. Your head spins, heavy with wine and wonder. Once again you grasp the paradox. What feels overwhelming, even impossible to you, was simply their rhythm of life. An empire bound together not just with swords and decrees, but with cups of diluted wine. And yet, as the echoes of laughter fade behind you, another world awakens. Beyond latticed walls lies a quieter realm, one of hushed whispers, rustling silks, and shadows that rarely step into the open. Leaving behind the thunder of feasts and the clatter of soldiers' boots, you now approach the royal harem. The very word stirs your imagination, heavy with associations from later centuries, tales of decadence, of forbidden pleasure. But here, in ancient Persia, the harem was far more than a secluded enclave of women. It was the empire's hidden nerve center, a place where whispers could weigh more than armies, where veiled figures commanded power greater than any general's sword. You stepped beneath a narrow archway, flanked by watchful eunuchs, men altered in body so they could never threaten the king's claim, yet trusted as the gatekeepers of this hidden world. Their eyes, sharp as drawn blades, track your every movement as you pass. Beyond lies a labyrinth few outsiders ever glimpse, the domain of the royal women. Wives, concubines, daughters, and countless servants, numbering in the hundreds, lived here. Some were noble Persian ladies, others captives carried from distant provinces, still others bought, gifted, or raised within these walls since childhood. Together, they inhabited a gilded cage of endless chambers, lush gardens, and quiet courtyards, all cut off from the outside world. The rules were absolute. No man crossed these thresholds except the king himself, his sons, and the eunuchs who served. Even the empire's highest generals, men who commanded vast armies, were barred from entering. And yet, for all their seclusion, the women of the harem were far from powerless. Here, in hushed conversations and glances masked by painted smiles, alliances formed and rivalries simmered. Decisions made in these private chambers rippled outward, shaping the empire itself. This was no idle boudoir of leisure. It was a parliament draped in silk. Picture the king's chief wife seated upon her own cushioned throne. She presided over the vast household, commanded an army of servants, arranged marriages, and, most critically, managed the treacherous politics of the harem. Every woman watched her closely. Some courted her favor, others plotted to topple her. A single gift of jewels or a carefully whispered slander could tilt the balance of power. When she spoke, her words found their way into the king's ear in the intimacy of pillow talk. And from there, those whispers could harden into law. Even the concubines, women often dismissed as mere companions, could wield extraordinary influence. Though concubines were ranked below the king's official wives, their fortunes could shift in an instant. If the king's eye lingered on one, or if she bore him a son, her status could eclipse even noble-born rivals. The birth of an heir was never just a personal victory, it was a political earthquake. You can almost picture the scene. A servant breathlessly announces, "The concubine from Bactria is with child." For a heartbeat, silence grips the harem. Smiles stretch across painted faces, but behind them lurk envy and dread. Gifts are exchanged, daggers hidden in words, and alliances rearranged overnight. To outsiders, the harem was often imagined as a den of pure luxury, women lounging endlessly on silk couches, fanned by servants and fed grapes. But the truth was far more tangled. For many, life here was claustrophobic, bound by rigid rituals, unblinking surveillance, and relentless competition. Every step was measured, every word calculated. Beauty became currency. Fertility transformed into a weapon. It was a survival tool sharper than any blade. Some women thrived, weaving webs of influence with grace and subtlety. Others faltered, their names fading into silence. Pawns were sacrificed daily in wars that left no scars except those of the spirit. Yet the harem was not simply a prison. It was also a school. Girls raised within these walls learned music, poetry, languages, diplomacy. They were trained in etiquette, in persuasion, in the art of manipulation so refined it could sway provinces. A harem girl might never set foot beyond the palace gates, but her whispers could travel across empires. In distant capitals, satraps sometimes bowed not to the king's decree alone, but to schemes seated quietly here, behind veils and curtains. And then there were the eunuchs. They were far more than guards. They acted as couriers, carrying messages, jewels, even bribes from one chamber to another. Their loyalty was priceless. Their betrayal could be fatal. A eunuch's favor toward a single woman might tip the balance of power in both harem intrigue and imperial politics. Picture the murmured bargains carried through corridors of silk. Carry my words to the king, and I will see your nephew promoted. In the harem, every relationship was a chess piece, and even the most ordinary errand boy could become a kingmaker. Rivalries were constant, and sometimes they turned lethal. Whispers in the chronicles tell of sudden illnesses, women disappearing overnight, cups of wine sweetened with just a touch too much spice. The harem was as dangerous as any battlefield, only here the weapons were subtler. A bracelet dusted with poison. A rumor dropped like a seed until it bloomed into suspicion at the royal ear. Deadly intent wrapped in perfume and veils. Yet for all its intrigue, this world also held moments of deep intimacy. Sisters comforted each other in times of fear. Mothers nursed their children in shaded courtyards. Friendships bloomed as women gossiped, laughed, and sang songs of their homelands. Some passed the hours with board games or embroidery, others tended sacred fires or whispered prayers for protection. Daily life was a blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary, a rhythm of confinement punctuated by tenderness, but edged always with the possibility of menace. For the king, the harem was never simply a realm of pleasure. It was also a form of insurance. Each woman represented more than beauty. She carried the politics of her homeland in her very veins. A Babylonian concubine meant Babylon's loyalty. A Median wife meant Median support. To wed her was to wed her province. To slight her was to insult her people. The harem was less a household than a map of the empire, its alliances stitched together in silk and blood. Imagine ruling an empire not just through decrees and armies, but through the delicate negotiations of pillow talk. The Greeks, of course, as they so often did, twisted these realities into scandal, filling their writings with tales of decadence and corruption. To the Greeks, the Persian harem was proof of corruption. In their eyes, the empire was drowning in decadence, ruled not by kings but by scheming women hidden behind curtains. Some of their stories dripped with exotic fantasy, describing the harem as a den of endless orgies and indulgence. Others cast it as a nest of manipulation, where ambitious wives whispered commands that shaped the empire. The truth, as always, likely lay somewhere in between, not pure debauchery, not perfect innocence, but a tangled web of influence, rivalry, and survival. You can almost picture a single night within those silken walls. The king enters, perfumed and robed, while dozens of women lift their eyes toward him. Hearts pound. Some women hope desperately for his gaze. Others dread it. A few mask themselves with feigned indifference. He chooses one chamber, one companion for the night. The rest withdraw, already planning their moves for tomorrow. In a world where everything hinged on proximity to the king, even a passing glance was a wager with fate. And then there were the children. Princes and princesses grew up inside these walls, raised under the watchful eyes of mothers, tutors, and eunuchs. For them, the harem was nursery, school, and playground all in one. They absorbed politics from the moment they could speak, learning to sense shifts in tone, to read alliances in a look, to play factions against one another. A boy who saw his mother rise, or fall, understood very quickly how fragile royal favor could be. By the time he stepped out of the harem into the wider court, he was already a miniature politician, sharpened by years of silent observation. And not all women remained confined. Some rose to breathtaking heights of power, stepping beyond the veils to rule as regents or shape policy as advisors. Take Atossa, daughter of Cyrus and wife of Darius. Her influence was so vast that even hardened generals trembled in her shadow. She shaped succession itself, guiding the empire's future with her will. Atossa was living proof that a woman of the harem could command not only the silken chambers, but the destiny of Persia itself. For countless women, the harem was less a home and more a gilded cage. Think for a moment about the longing that comes from never stepping beyond the palace gates. Stories of distant provinces might drift in, but their streets could never be walked. Freedom remained a dream, even while living in unmatched splendor. A fountain may glitter beautifully, yet its waters are forever bound within the stone basin. And still, within that confinement, the harem carried enormous weight in the empire's survival. It gave birth to heirs, sealed alliances, and quietly directed the flow of influence. This secluded world served as both refuge and battlefield, as much a sanctuary as it was a prison. From your perspective, its laws feel stifling, its politics almost cruel. But to Persians, this was simply the hidden machinery of power, masked, veiled, and whispered. When you step back through the archway, leaving behind the rustle of silk and the haze of perfume, the reversal of values strikes you again. What feels like oppression, secrecy, and scheming in your eyes was, for them, the very lifeblood of the empire. Behind closed doors, Persian women could shake the world outside, and perhaps that is the greatest paradox of all. The voices most secluded often turned out to be the ones that carried the greatest power. Crossing beyond the harem, the air feels noticeably lighter, freer. But Persia's world of strange normalities isn't done with you yet. From the veils and perfume chambers, you now step into what appears, at first glance, far more straightforward, a walled garden. To the eye, it seems like paradise itself, and that was no accident. Here lies a surprise. The very word paradise comes from these Persian gardens. Paradisa, meaning an enclosure. What you're seeing is not merely clever gardening. It is theology made visible, expressed through flowers, water, and stone. You pass beneath the arch of a gate, and at once the noise of the bustling city disappears. Within these walls lies order. Straight paths stretch in perfect grids, neatly dividing the lawns into 4 quarters. Water runs through carefully carved channels, bubbling from fountains that glitter in the sunlight. Slender cypress trees rise like sentinels, standing guard beside beds of roses, violets, and lilies. Fruit trees bend under the weight of figs, pomegranates, and apples, while birds dart among the branches, their songs blending with the soft murmur of flowing water. For a moment, it feels as if the world itself has paused to breathe. But don't mistake this calm for something accidental. This serenity was crafted with intention. These gardens were not natural, as we imagine today. They were designed as miniature reflections of the cosmos. The Persians, surrounded by unforgiving deserts and towering mountains, knew chaos all too well. So, when they carved out a rectangle of symmetry, filled it with greenery, and fed it with hidden channels of water, they weren't just planting for beauty's sake. They were making a statement. Human hands, guided by divine law, could conquer disorder and bring harmony to even the harshest of landscapes. The water that sustained this order came from underground canets, drawn from aquifers miles away, true lifelines beneath the earth. To Persians, this flowing water was more than utility. It was sacred, like the living veins of a goddess channeled into balance. Streams were measured with precision, each quadrant of the garden receiving an equal share. Inequality of water wasn't simply wasteful. It was a violation of holiness itself. A gardener who dared to dam or divert a channel for selfish reasons could be punished as though he had committed blasphemy. To you, irrigation might seem like nothing more than plumbing. To them, it was ritual. Picture yourself now in a royal garden at Persepolis. Even Darius the Great himself might have once strolled these paths. Attendants followed, robes brushing the ground, fans in hand to stir the air. Foreign ambassadors, eyes wide with wonder, were led here on purpose. The message needed no translation. Look at what we have created. We command chaos. We bring order where the desert rules. There was no need to brag. Roses and fountains spoke louder than words. A Greek envoy might scoff under his breath, calling them pretty flowers. But he left with the truth lodged in his mind. He had just witnessed the Persian Empire itself, expressed in stone and green. The meaning ran far deeper than decoration. Each tree symbolized eternal life. Every fountain stood for the wellspring of creation. The paths represented the four corners of the world. Even the layout carried weight. The rectangle was a mirror of cosmic order. To walk inside was to walk across a map of the universe, geometry turned sacred, harmony laid out for the eye. You could almost imagine the low hum of priests chanting while gardeners shaped the shrubs. In reality, the priests rarely soiled their hands with earth. That holy labor fell to gardeners, whose work was part toil, part devotion. And then, the luxury. Guests stretched out on carpets beneath shaded pavilions, sipping wine as cool breezes whispered through the leaves. Soft music drifted across the garden. Servants brought trays piled with dates and melons. The scent of roses mingled with saffron and the smoke of roasting meat. These were not gardens meant for digging weeds. They were stages for leisure, for diplomacy, for the performance of power. To be welcomed inside was to be drawn into the empire's inner harmony. To remain outside was to linger in chaos. So powerful was this idea that the Persians carried it wherever they conquered. Later kings built estates across foreign lands, but always with a garden at the heart. Paradise became more than a place, it became a statement of Persian civilization itself. A paradise that could be replanted anywhere, proof that order could bloom even in the harshest soil. Centuries later, the Greeks borrowed the word, shaping it into paradisos. Christians carried it further, transforming it into paradise. And the meaning endured. Even today, whenever you say, paradise, you are unknowingly retracing the footsteps of Persian kings strolling beneath branches heavy with pomegranates. But here's the twist. These gardens were never just aristocratic luxuries. They were holy ground. Some stood beside fire temples, where priests used flowing water in sacred acts of purification. Others were consecrated to specific gods. Within their walls, sacrifices were offered, oaths sworn, and rituals performed. A marriage blessed beneath shaded boughs was not simply picturesque, it was cosmic confirmation. To Persians, greenery itself was theology. Water embodied divinity. Shade was nothing less than salvation. Yet you can feel the shadow behind the beauty. Because if gardens symbolized order, then they also excluded disorder. The sweat of peasants working fields found no place here. Villages struggling to scrape together enough water never drank from marble fountains. These walled Edens were privileges of the elite, glimpses of heaven, fenced off from the majority. For most, paradise could only be seen from afar, never entered. The empire's order, like the garden walls, was selective. Still, the cultural weight of these spaces was overwhelming. Poets sang of them as symbols of love, eternity, and divine union. Kings wielded them as instruments of propaganda, planting exotic trees carried back from conquered lands. Imagine walking in a garden at Susa and seeing Indian trees standing beside Egyptian vines. The very soil became a living atlas of conquest. Every blossom and branch whispered the same message: the world itself blooms under Persia. The king never needed to march his soldiers through the streets. His orchards did the parading for him in silence. Predictably, the Greeks scoffed. They sneered at what they saw as Persian indulgence, mocking rulers who lounged in shaded retreats instead of hardening themselves under the sun. To a Spartan, gardens were the very symbol of weakness. To a Persian, they were proof of cosmic triumph. Once again, two worlds collided, one exalting endurance in dust, the other celebrating harmony in shade. Which was right? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But the record speaks for itself. Persian gardens endured long after Spartan training grounds faded back into dirt. The vision outlived its empire. Centuries later, Islamic architects inherited the Persian garden and folded it into their own designs. You see it in mosque courtyards, in palace grounds, in tiled squares with fountains at the center. The fourfold symmetry spread outward, to Mughal India, to Andalusian Spain, to every landscaped courtyard where water, stone, and greenery meet in balance. Even today, When you wander a park with straight paths and water channels crossing in neat designs, you are, without knowing it, walking through Persian philosophy. Pause at a fountain for a moment. Watch the water arch upward, scattering sunlight into rainbow fragments. Birds splash in the basin, their wings flicking glittering droplets onto the stone. The sound is steady and gentle, like the rhythm of breath. Now you understand why Persians treasured such spaces. In a land of heat and dust, a garden was never just decoration. It was life itself. It was sanity preserved against the desert. It was proof that chaos could be bent into order, that a glimpse of heaven could be coaxed onto the earth. And so you rest in the shade of a cypress tree, listening to the distant notes of flutes drifting across the lawn, feeling the coolness settle against your skin. To you, it may feel like luxury. To them, it was far more. It was faith, politics, propaganda, and pleasure, all bound together in living green. Another Persian, normal, shocking in its severity, yet strangely alluring in its beauty. Another reminder that even roses could carry theology in their petals. But the cool hush of the garden does not last. Step back into the streets, and the heat and noise return at once. Dust swirls beneath sandals. Merchants shout above the din, children dart between donkeys, and suddenly you are surrounded by a very different kind of order. Not the harmony of roses and fountains, but the iron grip of law and punishment. If paradise was built with symmetry, then justice was carved with pain. And Persian punishments were as strange, as inventive, and as merciless as any corner of their empire. The first glimpse comes in the marketplace. A man is dragged forward, wrists bound tight, accused of theft. This is no elaborate ordeal with molten brass. His case is simpler, swifter. The magistrate does not argue, does not deliberate. He gives a signal. Soldier sees the thief, and with a single slash, his ears are cut away. Blood spatters onto the dust, but the crowd barely stirs. To them, this is ordinary. Lose your ears, and you lose your honor. The man staggers, shrieking, forever branded by shame, his crime written on his face for all to see. Other punishments follow the same brutal logic. Noses cut away. Tongues slit open. Foreheads seared with the mark of a hot iron. The purpose was not only to punish, but to humiliate, permanently. Every scar turned a body into a walking warning, a living law carved into flesh. Imagine strolling through Persepolis and passing men with half-shorn faces, women with mutilated lips, foreheads burned with symbols of shame. The streets must have felt like a grim gallery of cautionary tales. And beyond mutilation, there were the executions. Some executions were swift, a sword's edge, a spear thrust, a rope tightening around the neck. But others were drawn out, theatrical, almost ritual in their cruelty. One notorious method was entombment alive. A traitor might be forced into a narrow gap between walls, bricks stacked tight until only the face remained visible. There he would be left to starve, his body sealed into stone while his eyes glared out at passers-by. To Persians, this was justice made visible. To you, it is the stuff of nightmares. Then there was flaying. Yes, flaying. The skin peeled from a traitor's body, then stretched and nailed across the city gates, or worse, draped over the judge's very chair. It became a grotesque banner, a silent proclamation. This is what awaits those who betray order. Picture stepping into a courtroom and seeing the seat of judgment literally upholstered in human skin. Subtle? Not at all. Effective? Almost certainly. Yet the Persians did not view these punishments as mindless cruelty. To them, every act carried symbolism. Severing ears meant silencing lies. Cutting noses meant stripping away arrogance. Walling a traitor alive meant shutting chaos out of society. In their eyes, each punishment restored balance in the eternal struggle between truth and pollution. Pain itself became sacred, as if even mutilation could be transformed into theology. And then you hear whispers of something darker still. perhaps the most infamous punishment of all. The boats. Later writers called it scaphism. Imagine two hollowed-out logs, joined together like a coffin, with the victim trapped inside. Only his head, hands, and feet left protruding. He was force-fed milk and honey until his stomach revolted, then smeared with more honey across his exposed skin to lure swarms of insects. Dragged out onto a stagnant pond, the victim baked beneath the sun while flies, wasps, and maggots fed on his body for days. Some accounts insist that men lingered like this for more than a week, alive, but consumed slowly by bites, stings, and decay. To you, it sounds like the invention of a horror story. To Persians, it was the ultimate justice for ultimate crimes: treason, regicide, betrayal. If mutilations were lessons, then scaphism was theater. A stage of terror meant to sear its message into every onlooker's mind. Foreigners recoiled. Greek writers, appalled, described Persians as sadists, obsessed with pain. But Persians themselves framed these acts differently. They believed such punishments were necessary to safeguard the cosmic balance. Better one traitor rot in a pond than an empire collapse into chaos. Officially, brutality was not entertainment, it was preservation. And yet, you suspect some spectators watched with more interest than they admitted, the way modern drivers slow to gawk at wrecks. Not all punishments ended in blood. Some were fines, livestock seized, grain taken, forced service demanded. But even fines rarely stood alone. They were often paired with lashings. And the lashes themselves came in chillingly precise numbers: 50, 100, 300. Each strike carefully counted, each blow a living reminder of cosmic consequence. A farmer who polluted water might be beaten with rods until his back split open, then fined an ox besides. Justice here was never just pain or scarcity. It was both, sting and starvation combined. And you wonder, how did ordinary Persians endure this? Did the weight of fear bend them into obedience, or did it plant seeds of quiet resentment? Likely both. One thief might falter, glancing at his neighbor's mutilated ears, while another might grit his teeth, vowing revenge. The empire bet that terror outweighed rebellion. And considering how long it lasted, perhaps that gamble paid off. But punishments weren't only about pain. They were about performance. And so comes the public spectacle. Punishments in Persia were never hidden away. They were staged in markets, at city gates, in crowded squares. Justice was theater, its lessons hammered into the minds of spectators through fear. Children watched ears tumble into the dust. Merchants paused mid-trade to hear the snap of whips. Travelers carried stories of flayed skins back to distant villages. In a world where few could read or write, punishment itself became propaganda. Why hang posters when you could hang bodies? And yet, the contradictions are impossible to ignore. This same empire that mutilated criminals also built paradise gardens, engineered cannons, praised truth, and sang hymns to light. The paradox is staggering. How could roses and scaphism coexist? How could paradise and mutilation both be parts of the same civilization? Perhaps that was Persia's secret, extremes woven tightly together. Beauty and brutality, order and terror, all justified beneath the banner of cosmic balance. Even soldiers learned to meet horror with humor. One jokes, "Better to lose your nose than your skin." Another points to a man without ears and laughs. "At least he doesn't have to hear us." This gallows humor thrived in Persia, just as it does today in prisons or barracks. Even nightmares become bearable when draped in laughter. But for the condemned, there was no such comfort. Picture yourself bound, hearing your sentence read aloud, knowing your body would soon become a billboard of guilt. Imagine the eyes of the crowd shifting, from pity to revulsion, as the knife cuts, as blood marks you forever. In that instant, Persian justice must have felt less like human law and more like divine wrath made flesh, unstoppable, absolute. You step back, shaken. Another Persian, normal, that rattles you to your core. To Persians, such measures were a matter of survival. To you, they look like pure cruelty. But once again, perspective shifts. In a sprawling empire where uprisings simmered and chaos forever threatened, perhaps fear was the only binding force strong enough to keep it all from unraveling. Their vision of paradise might have been walled with fragrant roses, yet those same walls were also built with ears and flayed skin. The empire shone brilliantly, but its brilliance was trimmed with blood. You stumble away from the marketplace, the image of severed ears scattered in the dust and rumors of men sealed alive into walls still clinging to your mind. Surely, you think, Persia must have exhausted its capacity to shock you. But as twilight thickens and shepherds herd their flocks home from the fields, you catch sight of another peculiarity. This time, it is not about how Persians treated people, it's about how they treated animals. Snarling dogs lurk near the edge of the street. Frogs leap beside the irrigation channels. And suddenly it seems as if every living creature carries moral significance. In ancient Persia, animals were never regarded as mere beasts. Some stood as sacred guardians, while others were seen as demonic intruders. And the laws governing them carried punishments just as severe as those for human crimes. Take the dog, for instance. Not simply a loyal companion, but in Zoroastrian belief, a holy defender of order itself. The Avesta, their sacred scripture, praises dogs as divine allies, protectors of homes and herds, warriors against demons, and even guides for souls on their journey after death. A faithful dog was no ordinary animal. It was a soldier of the cosmos. To raise a hand against such a creature was unthinkable. To kill one was a crime so grave it brought punishment by lashes. Not a dozen strikes, but hundreds. Some texts speak of 300 lashes for the death of a shepherd's dog. A man might endure mutilation and survive, but pity the soul who dared harm a hound. Picture that scene. Picture a farmer's mastiff, barking fiercely at an intruder. A thief, desperate and reckless, hurls a stone and shatters the dog's leg. Word spreads quickly through the village. Soon the thief is dragged before a magistrate. His punishment isn't a gentle warning to be kinder to animals, it is brutal. He is lashed until his back is nothing but torn flesh, fined in grain, and cursed by priests. The reasoning was straightforward. By injuring a dog, he had aligned himself with the forces of demons. Dogs weren't decorative companions. They were guardians woven into the Empire's sacred defense system. Even in death rituals, their role was indispensable. When corpses were brought to the Towers of Silence, dogs, especially those with distinctive markings above their eyes, known as four-eyed dogs, were led to look upon the body. This practice, called Sasid, the dog's glance, was believed to banish the corpse demon Nasu. Where human eyes failed to repel corruption, a dog's gaze could succeed. Imagine, for a moment, your modern funeral director solemnly leading a beagle around a coffin before offering prayers. To Persians, this wasn't absurd, it was a crucial form of spiritual pest control. But if dogs embody protection, other creatures represented chaos. Frogs, ants, snakes, and above all small, noxious pests, like vermin, lizards, or insects, were considered the spawn of Ahriman, the spirit of evil. Killing them wasn't seen as mundane pest control. It was nothing less than holy combat. Priests urged the faithful to stone them, drown them, or crush them whenever possible. Each dead frog was counted as a tiny triumph in the endless war between order and destruction. To us, this may sound extreme, even fanatical. But to Persians, every squashed lizard or smashed insect tipped the scales of the cosmos toward truth and order. Yet the laws themselves could feel puzzling. Striking down a snake was celebrated as righteous, but killing a water dog, like an otter, was condemned as sinful. Cats, meanwhile, slithered uneasily between both sides, at times tolerated, at other times despised as demonic agents. Imagine the tension of finding a lizard crawling into your pantry, knowing the weight of cosmic judgment might hinge on what you did next. So what do you do? Do you kill the creature to earn divine merit, or risk lashes for striking down the wrong species? In many ways, Persian life resembled a constant, high-stakes game of which animal is sacred? A game where the rules carried cosmic consequences. A single mistake could ruin you. One law prescribed 200 lashes for killing a beaver. Another demanded an entire year of penance for harming a water dog. Yet failing to kill vermin when you had the chance could also be judged as a crime. Picture a weary villager pleading before a stern priest. "I swear, Holy One, the frog leapt away too quickly." And the priest, unimpressed, replying coldly, "Ignorance of the frog is no excuse." To outsiders, this all seemed laughable. Greek writers mocked Persians for worshipping dogs while despising frogs. To them, dogs were practical, yes, but far from sacred, and vermin were just vermin, hardly worthy of spiritual obsession. They simply could not comprehend why Persians codified animal behavior with such ferocity. But at the heart of it was Zoroastrian dualism. In their worldview, every living thing was enlisted on one side or the other, either aligned with Asha, truth and order, or with Druj, the spirit of chaos. There was no neutral ground. Allies were to be protected. Enemies were to be obliterated. Even the most ordinary backyard critter was a soldier in this endless cosmic struggle. This mindset spilled into daily life. Farmers were expected to feed and shelter their dogs faithfully. Travelers were urged to keep dogs close as protection against wolves. Priests even praised those who gave scraps to stray dogs. On the other hand, children were scolded if they showed mercy to a frog or spared an ant. To leave vermin alive was to leave chaos unchallenged. Imagine bedtime prayers whispered by a Persian child. "Bless mother, bless father, and curse all frogs." And dogs, of course, were not only defenders in life. Dogs were more than protectors in daily life. They were guardians in myth. In Zoroastrian visions of the afterlife, when a soul approached the Chinat bridge, dogs appeared to guide the righteous safely across, their growls keeping the lurking demons at bay. Their loyalty, Persians believed, stretched far beyond the span of mortal life. No wonder these animals were revered. To harm one was not merely cruelty. It was akin to betraying your own guardian spirit. And here, the paradox comes into sharp focus. This was a civilization that mutilated thieves, sanctioned sibling marriages, and purified themselves with bull's urine, yet at the same time, it passed laws to ensure puppies were fed and sheltered. Brutality and compassion were braided so tightly together that one could not be separated from the other. A man might lose his ears for stealing bread, while another could be flogged for neglecting a dog. In Persia, the sacred and the savage did not stand apart. They walked hand in hand. You linger in the twilight, watching a shepherd's dog trot proudly beside his flock. Children scatter scraps to strays outside the fire temple, their laughter rising into the evening air. And then, in the same moment, a boy hurls a stone at a frog near the well, urged on by approving priests. To you, the contrast feels absurd, tenderness for some creatures, mercilessness for others. But to Persians, there was no contradiction. It was perfect order. Every gesture, whether feeding a hound or smashing a toad, played its part in the great cosmic struggle. And what unsettles you most is their absolute certainty. There was no hesitation, no room for doubt. For them, the command was simple: protect what is sacred, destroy what is demonic. For you, it feels harsh and unsettling. For them, it was the very definition of survival. As the twilight deepens and silence spreads across the fields, you watch a dog curl by the fire, its eyes glinting in the torchlight. And in that moment, it dawns on you, in ancient Persia, even the animals carried the weight of eternity. A hush settles, and with it, the memory of an empire that saw the divine in every breath, paw, and wing. You have wandered through towers stacked with human bones, watched priests pour out sacred urine, and seen men thrust their hands into molten brass. You have listened to wedding hymns sung between brother and sister, bowed low in torch-lit halls where kings shimmered like living gods, and reeled through banquets that stretched until dawn. You slipped behind the veils of harems thick with whispers, strolled through gardens built as earthly paradises, and winced at mutilations and flayings carried out in the dust of public squares. You even learned that in Persia, a dog's gaze could banish a demon, while the croak of a frog might mark betrayal. And now, the journey begins to draw to a close. The streets grow quiet. Merchants shutter their stalls. Thin streams of smoke from cooking fires curl upward and fade. The hum of the city gives way to the chorus of crickets and the distant barking of dogs chasing shadows. You walk slowly, your shoulders weighted not with fear, but with the sheer gravity of what you've witnessed. Every detail presses into your memory, the strange logic of purity, the endless rituals, the contradictions of tenderness interwoven with cruelty. And then realization comes. To the Persians, none of this was bizarre. Towers of silence, to you grotesque, were to them necessary. A brother marrying his sister was not scandal, but sacred duty. Flaying a criminal was not cruelty, but a form of cleansing. Gardens were not indulgence, but cosmic reflections of paradise itself. They lived in a world where every act mattered, every clipping of hair, every sip of watered wine, every glance and gesture. A world where chaos forever threatened at the edges, and where each ritual, however strange it might seem to you, served as a barrier against that darkness. What startles you now, what leaves you shaken and wide-eyed, was once as ordinary to them as breathing. You sit quietly beside a courtyard pool, watching moonlight shimmer across the surface of the water, trembling as though some goddess above were listening to its song. A priest drifts past, murmuring prayers under his breath. Overhead, a vulture glides in wide, soundless circles, already searching for its next grim duty atop a tower of silence. Life and death, purity and pollution, order and chaos, all move together in endless cycles. And the Persians, ever vigilant, kept score with chance, with punishments, with rituals that sought to hold the balance. It's easy to recoil, to pass judgment, to mutter, "How barbaric! How strange!" But then a thought interrupts. How many of your own customs would leave them appalled? Would they laugh at you washing your hands with perfumed soap instead of sacred bull's urine? Would they scoff at your funerals, where flowers are thrust into the soil, polluting the earth they guarded so fiercely? Would they call it obscene that you toss your cut hair into a trash bin, or let dogs lounge as pampered pets instead of warriors of purity? Perhaps what feels ordinary to you would have been scandal to them, just as their world leaves you astonished. A cool breeze brushes across your face. For the first time in this long journey through Persia's strangeness, you feel less disturbed and more humbled. Every culture has its ways of holding back the darkness, of stitching order into the fabric of life. Some rely on laws, some on rituals, some on gardens, some on punishments. Persia bound all of these together, interweaving brilliance and brutality, beauty and terror, devotion and dread, into one vast tapestry. You close your eyes. The sounds blur and soften, the trickle of cannet water, the low murmur of distant chants, the whisper of wind through the cypress trees. They stretch out, growing slower, fainter. The Persians fade. Their towers collapse to dust. Their gardens dry into barren earth. Their punishments are gone, but their strangeness has not disappeared. Time has softened it, reshaping terror into curiosity, shock into something closer to a lullaby. And so, without realizing, you breathe a little deeper. Your shoulders loosen. You picture yourself not as a passing visitor but as a dreamer, lying beneath the Persian stars. The vultures no longer strike fear. Instead, they circle overhead like watchful guardians of sleep. The dogs have ceased their snarling. Now they curl peacefully at your feet, faithful companions guarding your rest. The gardens, once filled with sermons and symbols, no longer preach. They are simply places of shade and fragrance, where water whispers gently in the background. Even the punishments themselves blur into distant symbols, their sharp edges dulled by centuries. The empire that once demanded bowing and obedience now asks nothing more than that you rest. The kings who once commanded armies with a glance have fallen utterly silent. The herms stand empty, their silken curtains dissolved into dust. The banquets are quiet, the cups overturned, the fires long extinguished, yet the story lingers, softened by the hush of history. And in that hush you are safe. You are no longer bound by their rules, struck by their lashes, or judged by their trials. You are only a listener now, wrapped in the strangeness of the past, free to let it rock you gently to sleep. In darkness, strangeness becomes soft. Even horror loses its bite when it exists only as memory. So let these images drift upward like smoke, thinning as they rise. Let the vultures spiral into the distance, the rivers grow quiet, the kings withdraw into their vanished palaces. Allow the gardens to linger just long enough to scent your thoughts, then blur into dream. Let your breathing deepen. Let your heart slow its rhythm. Let your eyes grow heavy. Because tonight, the shocks of Persia are no longer yours to endure. They are folded neatly into the pages of history, softened by centuries, safe enough to rest upon. Rest now in the hush of empire, in the quiet where even demons hesitate to tread. Rest, for the night is long but gentle. Rest, for the burdens of the past have already been carried and set aside. Rest, for here within this story you are safe. Sweet dreams.